The officer smiled when he pressed the blade into my rear tire. I saw the whole thing from across the parking lot. The casual lean, the practiced motion, the quick glance left and right, like a man checking before jaywalking, not before committing a federal crime. He had no idea I was watching. He had no idea who I was. By the following week, he would be standing before a federal investigator with his badge on the table and his entire career reduced to a case file number. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Isaiah Brooks. I am 44 years old. I hold the rank of colonel in the United States Army, and I command the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, which most people know as Delta Force. I say this not as a boast, and not yet as a warning, though it will become both before this story is over. I mention it only because it is the central fact that Officer Bryce Kemp of the Garner, North Carolina Police Department failed to consider when he decided on a warm afternoon that my presence in a hardware store parking lot was a problem requiring his personal attention. I wasn't in uniform. I never am on leave. I wore a gray t-shirt, dark jeans, worn running shoes with a fraying left lace I kept meaning to replace. I drove a several-year-old black Ford F-150 with a dented rear bumper and a faded Fort Bragg sticker on the windshield, the kind of truck that says nothing about the man driving it. I'd stopped at a hardware store on Timber Drive to pick up caulk for a leaky tile at my sister Simone's house. I parked, went inside, spent some time, came back out with a small paper bag in my hand. That's when I saw him. He was crouching beside my rear passenger tire, his right hand moving with the economy of someone who had at least thought it through. Something activated in my chest. Not fear, a very old signal, the same one that went off in a courtyard in Mosul and on a ridgeline outside Kandahar. The signal that says, "This is real. This is happening. Pay attention." I stopped walking. I watched. I saw the blade go in. The sound was almost nothing. A controlled exhale of air, like a closing door in another room. He straightened, slipped the blade into his pocket, adjusted his belt with both hands, and walked toward his marked cruiser at the far end of the lot with the unhurried ease of a man who had just tied his shoe. His nameplate, which I would read from security footage later, said Kemp. I stood with my bag of caulk and felt something settle inside me with the quiet precision of a mechanism locking into place. Not anger, not outrage, though both were present underneath it. Something colder and more structural. The part of my brain that doesn't perform emotions. It plans. I crouched beside the tire and confirmed what I already knew. A clean sidewall puncture. A small, deliberate cut. The kind left by a folding knife pressed in and pulled. Not a nail from the road. Not a worn valve. A man had taken a blade to my property in a public parking lot on an ordinary afternoon because he had watched me walk into a store, assessed me by the most visible thing about me, and decided I deserved it. I called my sister. "Isaiah," Simone said immediately, and I could hear my nephew laughing in the background and Cameron moving around in the kitchen. "Did you get the caulk?" "I got it," I said. "Simone, I need the manager's contact information for this hardware store. Name, phone number." "Don't ask why yet." A beat of silence. "What happened?" "I'll explain in person." She came back soon with a name. Guillermo Reyes. I thanked her and put the phone away. I changed the tire in the parking lot. I keep a full spare in the bed. A habit from years of operating in environments where a blown tire isn't an inconvenience, it's a mission-ending event, and drove to Simone's house through the flat October light. Cameron was grilling on the porch. My nephew Malik climbed my left arm before I'd cleared the gate with the focused ambition of a young boy who has identified a vertical surface. I let that go on for longer than I planned because I hadn't held him in over a year, and I had missed him in the blunt, wordless way you miss things when you spend too much time in places where softness gets stored away for later. Then Simone appeared in the doorway with that particular look, and I followed her inside. She poured sweet tea over ice without asking, and set a glass in front of me on the kitchen counter. I told her what I'd seen, plainly, and in sequence. "You're sure?" she said when I finished. "Not quite a question. I watched him do it," I said. "Clean sidewall puncture. He looked both ways first." "Did you call the police?" I looked at her across the counter. "Right," she said quietly, and took a long sip of her tea. "I need to get to that store manager before end of business today," I said. "Exterior cameras on that lot. If the footage exists, I need it preserved before anyone has a reason to make it disappear." She studied me for a moment with our father's eyes. "Isaiah, you're not going to do something that ends up on the news. I'm going to let the legal process do everything," I said. "I'm just going to make sure the people involved understand the full context before they decide how to respond." Guillermo Reyes was a compact, unhurried man with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the practiced efficiency of someone who had managed difficult situations before. I explained the situation directly. A customer, my vehicle, deliberate vandalism by a uniformed officer, exterior cameras that likely captured everything. I needed the footage preserved. He leaned back. "You file a police report?" "I intend to, but I want the footage secured first." He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded, stood, and led me toward the back office without further comment. He burned me a copy while I waited, and as I was standing to leave, he said, almost as an afterthought, "The squad car's plate is visible, if that's useful." "Very much," I said. I sat in my truck and played the footage on my phone. Sharp, absolutely unambiguous. Officer Bryce Kemp, badge number legible as he turned, crouching beside my tire. His marked cruiser in an adjacent frame, plate and unit number both clear. He had parked 3 rows away, close enough to approach deliberately, far enough that a casual observer might not connect the vehicles. It was, I noted with a detachment that surprised me, a reasonably considered operational choice, but not considered enough. He hadn't checked for store cameras. He hadn't thought about sight lines from the entrance. That told me something important about how he'd felt walking away. He'd felt safe, untouchable, like a man operating in an environment where certain actions simply did not produce certain consequences, not because the law didn't exist, but because enforcement had historically chosen not to find him. That assessment was about to require significant revision. I called Nia Okoro that evening from Simone's back porch. Her name had been given to me by the NAACP Legal Defense Fund's North Carolina office when I'd called them earlier that afternoon. Her assistant had put me through quickly when I mentioned documented video evidence of police misconduct. "Colonel Brooks," she said when she picked up. Her voice was exact and unhurried. "Tell me what happened." I told her in sequence without editorializing. Events in order. Evidence identified. Context noted. She didn't interrupt once. "Your rank and command," she said when I finished. "How public are you willing to be? And how quickly?" Calibrated carefully. But I want the department to know it before they decide on a posture. I want them to understand what they're touching before they make any decisions. She was quiet for a moment. "You want them to feel the weight before they lean on it?" "Yes. I'll draft a civil rights complaint and a preservation letter soon," she said. "We'll include your rank and affiliation in the file." I thanked her and ended the call. I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee that had gone cold without my noticing, looking at the dark shapes of the oak trees in Simone's yard. There was a particular stillness I'd learned to inhabit over years of operating in places where stillness meant survival, not passivity, not waiting. But a focused and deliberate suspension, the calm before a planned action. I had the evidence. I had legal counsel. I had a chain that once pulled would reach further than Officer Kemp had any reason to imagine. The following morning, I went for my regular run early. The air smelled of cut grass and overnight rain. By the halfway point, I had a clean operational picture. Nia would file the complaint. The department would respond defensively. We would document that response and escalate accordingly. I was prepared for several contingencies. I was nearing the end of my run when a marked Garner PD cruiser pulled up beside me and matched my pace. The window came down. The officer was young, sharp haircut, the careful blankness of a man performing authority he hadn't fully grown into. His nameplate said Pryor. "Sir, can I ask where you're headed this morning? We've had calls about unfamiliar individuals in the neighborhood." I slowed to a walk and looked at him directly. "I'm staying at the address 3 blocks ahead. I've run this route every morning for several days. The man at the corner house waves to me every time. If you need to verify anything I've just said, you're welcome to follow me to the address." He studied me for a moment, then, "No need, sir. Just following up." "I understand," I said. And then, without raising my voice, without changing my expression, "Tell Officer Kemp I said good morning." The change in his face was small. A fraction of a second. A flicker behind the eyes, gone before it fully formed. But I'd been reading faces in adversarial conditions for nearly 2 decades. He knew the name. He'd been sent. This was not a random patrol. He rolled the window up and drove away slowly, and I watched the cruiser until it turned the corner. Then I finished my run at a pace faster than I'd started it. When I came through Simone's back gate, still catching my breath, I pulled out my phone and called Nia Okoro. "They sent someone to surveil my morning run," I said when she picked up. A brief silence. "Same department? Marked Garner, PD. Young officer, clearly dispatched. He reacted to Kemp's name. That's documented retaliation behavior," she said. "I'm accelerating the filing. I also want to bring in a federal component. Civil rights violations under color of law. That moves this entirely out of internal affairs jurisdiction." "Do it," I said. There was a small clean satisfaction in saying those 2 words. The decision was made. The mechanism was in motion. Whatever Officer Bryce Kemp had imagined when he crouched beside my tire in that parking lot, the inconvenienced man who would change it and drive away and say nothing, that outcome no longer existed. It had ceased to exist the moment I stopped walking and watched him do it. He just didn't know that yet. Nia filed the preservation letter and the civil rights complaint that same morning. By mid-afternoon, she had a response. She called me while I was sitting on Simone's porch, watching Malik and his sister kick a soccer ball around the backyard, and her voice had a particular quality to it. Not surprise exactly, but the crisp alertness of someone who has just been handed something useful. "They came back fast," she said. "Captain Voss, Professional Standards Division. He wants a meeting tomorrow morning at the department." "What's his tone?" "Conciliatory. Very conciliatory." He used the phrase "unfortunate misunderstanding" twice in short sentences, which tells me he's already seen the footage. I watched Malik score against his sister with a precise low kick to the right corner, and his sister dropped to her knees in theatrical devastation. "All right," I said. "I'll be there. Isaiah, I want you to let me do the talking for the first several minutes. I need to establish the legal framework before you establish anything else." "Understood," I said. "And wear something that makes them think about your command," she added. And there was something dry and precise in her tone that I recognized as a lawyer who had done this before. I did not wear a uniform. I was on leave and had no intention of using my rank as a costume. But I wore a collared shirt and the kind of quiet, unadorned presence that over 2 decades of command produces in a man without him particularly trying. I arrived at the Garner Police Department with Nia beside me, her briefcase in her left hand and a second copy of the footage on a drive in her right. Captain Voss was waiting for us in a conference room on the second floor. He was in his mid-50s, silver-haired, with the careful stillness of a man who has managed institutional problems long enough to be very good at it. His handshake was firm, and his eye contact was direct, and everything about him communicated, "I am a reasonable person who wants this resolved." Beside him sat a woman he introduced as the department's legal counsel, a thin woman named Hartley, who had a yellow legal pad and a pen she kept clicking with her thumb. "Colonel Brooks," Voss said, and I noted that he used the rank without hesitation, which meant he'd done his research. "Thank you for coming in. I want to say, on behalf of the department, that we take this matter very seriously." "I'm glad to hear it," I said. Nia opened her briefcase and set 3 documents on the table: the complaint, the footage metadata report, and a printed timeline. She walked Voss through each one with the precise, unhurried clarity of a surgeon explaining a procedure. Hartley took notes. Voss watched the footage on the laptop Nia produced without expression, though I saw his jaw tighten at the key moment. When Nia finished, Voss folded his hands on the table. "Officer Kemp has been placed on administrative leave pending internal review," he said. "Administrative leave with pay," Nia said. "That is standard procedure during—" "I understand the procedure," Nia said pleasantly. "I want it noted in writing that the department is aware of the documented retaliation contact, the patrol vehicle dispatched to Colonel Brooks's running route the following morning, and that any further contact will be treated as federal obstruction." Voss looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at me. "Colonel, I want to ask you directly, what outcome are you seeking here?" I had thought about this carefully the night before, sitting on Simone's porch with cold coffee, and the particular clarity that comes after a decision has been made and the only remaining question is execution. I had considered several answers. I gave him the honest one. Officer Kemp committed a deliberate act of racial harassment against a civilian in a public parking lot, I said. The fact that the civilian happened to be me doesn't change what the act was. I want him terminated. I want the full civil rights complaint pursued through the Department of Justice. And I want the retaliation contact documented in his permanent record and in the federal file. What I do not want is a settlement with a confidentiality clause, a suspension that becomes a return, or a quiet internal resolution that protects the department's liability at the expense of any accountability. Hartley had stopped clicking her pen. Voss was quiet for a long moment. "That's a significant ask," he said finally. "It's a straightforward one," I said. "Colonel," he said carefully, "Officer Kemp has been with this department for years. He has a family. I understand your position, but I want to make sure." "Captain Voss," I said, and I kept my voice entirely level, the way I'd learned to keep it when delivering information that needed to land without noise. In my professional life, I have made decisions that resulted in consequences far more significant than a man losing his job. I am not asking you to ruin anyone. I'm asking you to hold a person accountable for an action he took deliberately in daylight on camera because he believed the environment would protect him from consequences. The question of whether that belief was correct is the question your department is now answering in real time. The room was quiet. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang twice and stopped. "I'll need to consult with the chief," Voss said. "Of course," Nia said. "You have until Monday. After Monday, the federal filing proceeds on its current timeline regardless." We drove back towards downtown in Nia's car, and she was quiet for several minutes before she said, "That last thing you said to him, about the environment protecting him from consequences, that was well put." "I meant it." "I know. That's why it worked." The weekend passed in the way weekends do when you're waiting for something to happen, and there's nothing to do but wait. I ran my regular miles each morning. No patrol cars this time. I helped Cameron replace a section of fence in the backyard, and Malik handed us nails with the gravity of someone performing critical surgery. I called my father in Richmond on Saturday evening, and we talked for some time about things that had nothing to do with any of this: his garden, a documentary he'd watched, the neighbor's new dog. And at the end, he said, in the way he had always said things that mattered without preamble or ceremony, "You handling something?" "Yes," I said. "Good," he said. "Call me when it's done." On Sunday night, I sat at Simone's kitchen table after everyone was asleep and went through everything once more: the footage, the complaint, Nia's notes from the meeting, the retaliation documentation. I had built this kind of operational package before. Not in conference rooms, but the logic was identical. Evidence, chain of custody, leverage, timeline. Every element in place, every contingency mapped. There was one variable I had not fully controlled, which was the department's response, and that response was coming soon. I closed the folder and looked at the window above the sink, which showed nothing but darkness and the faint reflection of the kitchen light. I thought about Kemp crouching beside my tire. I thought about the sound it had made, that small, controlled exhale. I thought about every version of that moment that had happened to men who did not have footage, did not have Nia Okoro, did not have the specific combination of resources and knowledge and institutional access that I, by the particular accident of my career, possessed. I thought about what those moments usually cost and what they usually produced, which was nothing, which was exactly what Kemp had counted on. I made a cup of coffee and sat with it until it was light outside. Then I got dressed and went for my run. Nia called early Monday morning. I was cooling down on the front steps. "Kemp is terminated effective this morning," she said. "The chief signed off last night. They're referring the matter to the district attorney's office for criminal vandalism and civil rights violation charges, and the federal filing is proceeding. They're not contesting jurisdiction." I was quiet for a moment. "The retaliation contact? In the file. Noted as conduct unbecoming and potential obstruction. Officer Pryor received a formal reprimand. And the confidentiality? No clause. They tried. I said no. They let it go." I sat on the front step in the morning air and felt the particular stillness of a thing completed. Not triumph. Triumph is loud and brief and mostly about the self. This was something else, quieter, more durable. The feeling of a structure that had been bent back to its correct shape. "Nia," I said, "thank you. Thank you for having the footage," she said, "and for not letting them talk you into a check. That was never an option. I know. That's what made them take you seriously." I went inside and told Simone. She stood in the kitchen doorway in her bathrobe with her coffee cup halfway to her mouth. And when I finished, she set the cup down on the counter and didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she crossed the room and put her arms around me the way she had when we were children. And I let her. And I stood there in her kitchen in the morning light, and the whole accumulated weight of a life lived mostly in the dark on behalf of people who would never know it. I felt some of that lift, just slightly, just enough to notice. Bryce Kemp was charged weeks later with malicious destruction of property and a civil rights violation under color of law. The case did not go to trial. He pleaded guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence, was fined, and received supervised probation. He was permanently barred from law enforcement employment in North Carolina. His pension, which had vested after many of his years, was partially forfeited under state misconduct provisions. I did not attend the hearing. I was back at work by then, back in a building with no windows in a security classification I cannot discuss, sitting across the table from people who needed me to make decisions about things that would not appear in any newspaper. That was my life, and I had returned to it without regret. Simone sent me a text message when the verdict came through. It said, "It's done. The kids say hi." I read it in a hallway between 2 briefings and typed back, "Tell them Uncle Isaiah says hi." And then I went back inside. But I think about that parking lot sometimes, not with anger. The anger burned clean and fast and left very little ash. I think about the specific geometry of it, the angle of the afternoon light, the sound of the hardware store's automatic doors, the way the tire exhaled when the blade went in. I think about what Kemp had assumed in that moment, what he had calculated, the version of the world he had been moving through confidently and for a long time, in which certain actions in certain parking lots against certain people produced no friction, no documentation, no consequence. I think about how long that version of the world had been accurate for him, and I think about the precise moment it stopped being accurate. Not when Nia filed the complaint, not when the footage played in that conference room, not when the chief signed the termination order. It stopped being accurate the moment I stopped walking across that parking lot and stood still and watched and did not look away. I drive a new truck now. Same model, same color. Same fraying lace on the left shoe that I still haven't replaced. Simone says that's a character flaw. She's probably right. I told her I'd get around to it. She said she'd believe it when she saw it. My father called the week after the verdict. "Handled," he said. "Handled," I said. A pause on the line, and then, "I know. I raised you right." I stood at the window of my office, the one with no view, in the building with no address, and I smiled. For the first time in a long time, I felt the particular weight of the thing I carry lift completely just for a moment, just long enough to breathe. The coffee in my cup was still hot. That, more than anything, felt like a beginning.